Hi everyone, so today we're going to be looking at chapter 4 of Jekyll and Hyde. We need to remind ourselves just briefly what happened at the end of chapter 3. So Jekyll had hosted a dinner party and Utterson had stayed behind at the end to speak to him about his connection with Hyde. The very final part of chapter 3 is Utterson promising to Jekyll that if anything should happen that he will follow the will as expected. So basically he says to him, I promise I will do what is expected in the will. That's at the end of chapter 3. Chapter 4 is the Carew murder case, and it opens being a year later from that dinner party. So a year has passed since Utterson made that promise. And it's a really good chapter in terms of the action that takes place. It's actually really what I think is the most interesting chapter. And it starts with a description of what happens in the chapter. It says that London was startled by a crime of singular ferocity. So basically there was a crime that took place that was so ferocious that it was startling the people of London. It was so kind of shocking and scary. Then it goes on to really describe what happens in the crime. One of the first key descriptions is a really good quote. It's an employment of pathetic fallacy. So remember, pathetic fallacy is when an author uses the environment or the weather to try and create a mood or atmosphere. And the quotation is, "A fog rolled over the city in the small hours." Now there's quite a persistent reference to things like fog or darkness or clouds throughout Jekyll and Hyde, and it's really always linked to the idea of Hyde's evil overtaking the environment or taking control of the environment. So that little quotation sets the scene of what will happen next. Then we get the perspective of a maid who is looking out onto the street really in the dark evening hours, and she's looking out onto the street and she sees two men. She sees them have a very brief conversation. One of the men appears to be very kind of respectable. He's got a top hat on and he has a cane. And then there's a really good quote. It just changes. The tone of this interaction changes. And all of a sudden, one of the men breaks out in a great flame of anger. And he starts stamping his foot and brandishing his cane until, and there's another great quote, with ape-like fury, he was trampling his victim underfoot. So we have pathetic fallacy employed to set the scene, and then we have this zoomorphism used again, ape-like fury. Stevenson loves to use zoomorphism when he's talking about Hyde to try and create a sense that he's this animalistic figure, a subhuman creature that is devoid of any human kind of qualities. So with ape-like fury, he beats this man, and he beats him to death. He kills him in the street, and the maid sees this. He beats him so severely that, another good quote, the bones were audibly shattered. So the maid, who's maybe 2 flights up, looking at this from her window, can hear the bones of this man break as he's attacked in the street. This shocks her to the point that she faints. So she is so disgusted and appalled by what she sees and scared that she faints up in this room. A couple hours later she awakes, it's about 2 in the morning, and she immediately calls the police to the scene. What's interesting is the police officer that goes to the scene, they take the body, they eventually find half a walking stick, and they take the body back to the morgue, and on the body they find a letter that's addressed to Utterson. So they call for Mr. Utterson to come, and Utterson identifies the body as being the one of Sir Danvers Carew. So Sir Danvers Carew was an important politician in the area, and this was a big deal. So this wasn't, the killing of someone random, it was the murder of a very important politician in the area. A really good quote which Stevenson throws in, which is quite subtle, is a quotation that relates to the police officer who's actually at the scene. It's at the bottom of page 16, and it says, "The next moment his eye lighted up with professional ambition." So the police officer hears from Utterson that it's the death of this high-profile politician, and the police officer has this moment of selfishness. He sees the possibility of him becoming more kind of respected within the police force because he's going to lead the investigation of a high-profile murder. So it's a little subtle suggestion that every man or all humanity has this duality within them. Even the police force are supposed to be respectable, honourable people. There can be a selfishness even in the investigation of a murder. So it's a really great quote there. Then we find out from Utterson that the half of the walking stick that is left, he knows for a fact, because he can see it and recognise it, that it's half of a walking stick that he gave as a gift to Henry Jekyll. So he immediately thinks this is Hyde that has done this because of the connection between Jekyll and Hyde. Now, the very end of the chapter, it basically is the police officer and Utterson going to Hyde's residence in Soho to search for him. They go through Soho, and there's a really great quote which describes what it feels like to Utterson. It's in the middle of page 17, like a district of some city in a nightmare. A really simple simile from Stevenson, but it gives us a clear indication that Soho is this place that's nightmarish, and it's really because of the evil that Hyde kind of has and can produce and take over an area with. At the end of the chapter, they go into Hyde's residence, they speak to the maid, and she says that she hadn't seen him for 2 months, and then he just turns up randomly, and they find in the residence that it's kind of ransacked. It seems like he's been in there, and they find the other half of the walking stick in there. So they know for a fact that it was Hyde that did this, because at Hyde's residence they have the murder weapon and they can prove it. What's really good is at the last part of this chapter, some other really important quotes, is the fact that they can't find Hyde though. It says his family could nowhere be traced, he had never been photographed, and the few who could describe him differed widely as common observers will. And it finishes with this idea that there is a haunting sense of unexpressed deformity. So everyone who has met Hyde, they can't really put a pin on what they know about him or how he looks, but the thing that everyone agrees on is that he has a haunting sense of deformity. And that word deformity keeps coming up. And again, it's this idea of him being subhuman and non-human. So the chapter finishes really kind of with no conclusion to that investigation. They can't find Hyde because, as we now know, he doesn't exist. He is the product of Henry Jekyll, so no one will find him. That's chapter 4. Lots of interesting points. We've covered things like zoomorphism. We've talked about pathetic fallacy at the beginning. Make sure you highlight and annotate those quotes, and we'll move on to chapter 5 next week.